Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. The lights were too bright when I opened my eyes. I didn't know what day it was. I never really did, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just the drugs. There was a stillness in the air, a mechanical hum and the faint flicker of fluorescent light above me, but nothing else. No voices, no footsteps, no meals sliding through the hatch in the door. My name is Eli Tanner. I was a patient at St. Joseph's Behavioral Health Center, just outside Morristown, New Jersey. The building was old, late 60s construction, the kind with reinforced doors and tiny wire-latticed windows. I'd been in the isolation ward, room 14C, for what they said was a psychotic break. It wasn't my first, but it was the worst. I don't remember most of the intake, just fragments. A smashed mirror, someone yelling my name, red and blue lights. After that, a blur of faces and needles. The room was small, 8 by 10, white walls stained near the corners where mold crept behind the paint. The bed was built into the floor. I had a stainless steel toilet and sink. No mirror, no sharp edges. The window was the size of a shoebox and covered in bars. I couldn't see the parking lot, just sky and brick wall. That morning, if it was morning, I noticed my limbs were slow. There was a fog inside my head, heavy and warm, like trying to think through a pillow. That meant I'd been given haloperidol again. Strong dose, long half-life. Enough to keep me sedated for at least 24 hours. I sat on the bed and waited for the usual, but it didn't come. No nurse slid open the panel, no temperature check, no paper cup of pills and warm water, just the hum of lights and the creak of my own movements. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. I tapped the metal frame 3 times. No answer. I thought maybe I'd misbehaved. Maybe they'd upped the dose and skipped a day. That happened before, after the incident with the orderly in February. But even then, someone came. Always. The panic didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, like the cold. I started checking things I hadn't checked in weeks. Pulled on the base of the toilet, checked under the sink lip for hidden notes or messages like I used to do in high school. Nothing. Eventually I called out. Hello? Soft at first, then louder, still no one. I waited. I counted 1,000 seconds in my head, still nothing. I pressed my face to the window slit, eyes squinting into the brightness. I thought I saw movement in the hallway, but it was a shadow, not human. It moved wrong, too fast. Then it vanished. I sat back on the mattress and whispered to myself, slow and steady like my last therapist had taught me. Not real, not yet. Observe, don't interpret. But even then, something felt off. The hospital had routines, schedules, rhythms. This was wrong. Hours passed, maybe more. The lights didn't dim. There were no voices in the hall, no carts rattling by, not even the sound of the intercom buzzing with a code blue in another wing. Just silence and flickering white light. That's when the smell started. It wasn't strong at first, just a faint sweetness, like rotting fruit left out too long, but it deepened, grew heavier, metallic, like rust soaked in sugar. I'd smelled something like it once, years ago, when a squirrel died in my mom's attic, and we didn't find it for 2 weeks. It didn't take long before I couldn't ignore it. I stood by the door and whispered again. Hello? Hello, I think something's wrong. My voice cracked from disuse. Please. I banged on the door. Nothing. I remembered the metal leg plate on the bed, bolted in but loose near the bottom. I'd noticed it months ago, during one of my manic episodes when I catalogued every corner of the room in sequence. I dropped to my knees and pressed along the seam. It flexed, just slightly. I worked at it with my fingernails until one split. I tasted blood. It didn't matter. I kept going. Time passed strangely. No cues. Just me and that tiny edge of possibility. After a while, it gave. One bolt snapped clean. I bent the plate back enough to give me leverage, enough to use as a tool, or a weapon if I had to. The lights flickered. Once. Then again. Emergency power. The hallway outside shifted from bright white to red, pulsing low and slow through the wire glass window slit. I heard a sound that didn't belong, something like fabric scraping metal followed by a wet slap. Then silence again. I backed away from the door. I knew that smell. It was stronger now. Inside the vents. Not imagined. Not hallucinated. Real. I wasn't alone in the ward. The noise returned hours later. Slow, dragging footsteps and something heavier scraping behind it. I didn't look. I stayed curled against the far wall, the metal panel gripped in my hands like a crucifix. Whoever it was didn't knock. They didn't speak. Just stood on the other side of the door. Then, breathing. Wrong. Wet. Fast. I didn't make a sound. I barely moved. I waited. Eventually the noise faded. Something heavy hit the wall 2 doors down, and then there was a scream. It didn't sound human, but it came from someone who used to be. I kept count in my head for what felt like another day. I rationed water from the sink, ate the last of the graham crackers they gave me during intake, stale but edible. When I used the toilet, I turned away from the window slit. My hands were trembling, not from fear exactly, but from whatever was still lingering in my system. The haloperidol was wearing off slowly, like a receding tide. I could think clearly for the most part, but my limbs still felt detached, like they were obeying orders with a half-second delay. I moved carefully, deliberately, trying not to overexert myself. The last thing I wanted was to collapse mid-plan. I needed all of me operational. The door was steel, heavy, the kind that locks magnetically from the outside. I'd studied it before, months ago, during one of my sharper episodes. It had no handle inside, only a speaker panel and the small observation slit, triple reinforced glass wired through. I knew I couldn't brute force my way out. The hinges were concealed, institutional grade, but I also knew from experience that nothing built by humans was perfect. I used the edge of the loosened bed plate to chip away at the screws holding the speaker panel in place. It was slow work. The screws weren't the typical kind, more like security bolts, but enough years of fidgeting had taught me patience. I chipped and scraped, taking breaks to rest and listen. Sometimes I'd hear something, footsteps, distant screams, the low groan of metal under strain. I couldn't tell if it was inside the building or outside. The place was too insulated. By what felt like the 6th or 7th hour of work, I'd loosened the bottom of the panel enough to wedge the bed plate inside. I pried it down and peered into the cavity behind. Wires, a circuit board, and, thank God, a manual override slot. I didn't have a keycard, but I didn't need one. My hands were already cut from the work, so I wiped blood along the base of the slot and pushed a shard of the metal plate into it, wiggling it like I'd seen maintenance do once in the common area when they were fixing a short. I held my breath. The magnetic lock didn't click open, but I heard something, a faint electric pop. The seal had weakened. I pressed my shoulder to the door and leaned hard. Nothing. I backed up, ran and threw my weight against it. Still nothing. I did it again. On the 3rd try, I heard a groan, metal flexing, giving. I staggered back and did it a 4th time, this time angling lower, into the weak point where the frame met the wall. The door gave way half an inch. I stopped and listened. Still no movement in the hallway. I rammed it again, another inch. The lock buzzed weakly, shorted out from my improvised override. I braced myself, drew in a breath, and hit the door one last time with everything I had left. The door swung open halfway and caught on something. I froze. It was a leg, not attached to anything alive. The hallway outside was streaked with dark stains, long and uneven like something had been dragged across the tile. The fluorescent lights above flickered in and out, some of them blown entirely, the rest casting red emergency glow. The smell I'd noticed earlier was stronger out here. It clung to everything, Clothing, walls, skin, a mix of decay, copper, bleach, and rot. I stepped over the leg. The body it belonged to was an orderly I recognized. Jensen, maybe mid-30s. He used to bring me books when I wasn't fit for group therapy. His mouth was open too wide, jaw broken sideways, and both eyes were missing. The skin on one arm was shredded down to tendon. Whatever had done this hadn't just killed him. It had torn him apart with purpose. I didn't stop to look long. The ward was shaped like a horseshoe, with rooms along the outer curve and a nurse's station in the middle behind plexiglass. I crept toward it, barefoot, metal shard in hand. I avoided the puddles, some water, some not. The walls were streaked with handprints, too high to be accidental. I found another body near the end of the corridor, a patient, male. I didn't know him well, but he was from the lower wing. He had bitten through his own wrist, still clutching a plastic spoon sharpened into a crude weapon. His door was still ajar. Whatever happened here, it hit fast and hard. The nurse's station was empty. Chairs overturned, monitors black. The main panel had been smashed. I stepped behind the counter, searching drawers. Found a half-empty box of latex gloves, a broken two-way radio, and a ring of keys. I almost cried when I saw them. I slipped them onto my wrist like a bracelet and kept moving. There was no power to the security doors, so the keys were my only way out. I bypassed the staff lounge and headed for the fire exit at the far end of the hall. As I turned the corner, I stopped dead. Something was in the hallway. It stood hunched over a gurney, unmoving at first. I thought it might be dead. Then it twitched, jerky and unnatural. The thing had been wearing scrubs once, maybe. Hard to tell now. The skin was grey, pulled tight. Hair hung in clumps. Its fingers were red up to the knuckles. I backed away slowly, praying the lights wouldn't flicker again. It turned toward me, and I saw its face, or what was left of it. No expression, just hunger, mindless and raw. I didn't run. I turned and walked backward until I rounded the corner, then sprinted. My feet slapped wet tile. I slipped once, caught myself. The fire exit was in sight. I shoved the first key into the slot, missed. Tried the second. The lock clicked. I threw the door open and fell into the stairwell. Behind me, I heard the thing shriek. Not a sound of pain, but rage. I slammed the door shut and twisted the manual bolt. The sound on the other side grew louder. Claws or nails against metal. The groaning strain of something too strong to be human, hammering on the other side. I didn't wait to see if it could get through. I climbed. 4 flights, no shoes, no food, no plan. But I was out of the ward, and I was still breathing. When I reached the main floor, I peeked through the narrow glass slot. The lobby was empty. Chairs scattered, magazines on the floor, pages torn. No one at the desk. The front doors were shattered inward, glass scattered like confetti. Outside, the sky was overcast. Not a single car moved in the parking lot. I stepped into the lobby and finally saw what was left of the world. It was wrong. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you've done something terribly irreversible, and now everything is holding its breath, waiting for the consequence. A few blocks away, smoke curled up from behind the trees. A siren blared in the distance, but it didn't sound like it was heading anywhere. Just looping. There were no birds, no cars, no wind. I stood there in a blood-stained gown with nothing but a shard of bed frame and a ring of keys. The air felt thick, still, like a hospital room right after the machine's flatline. And then I heard the gunshot. One sharp crack. Then another. Farther away, in the direction of the highway. I ducked low and ran for the utility shed behind the building. It was half open, rusted shut on one hinge. Inside, I found a toolbox and an old maintenance jacket. It fit poorly, but it covered the gown. I wrapped my feet in plastic trash liners from the bin. It wasn't much, but it was something. I knew I couldn't stay. The hospital was done. Whoever hadn't died in the initial attack had likely turned. I couldn't guess how long it had been. 2 days, 3. No power, no food supply, no survivors calling out. The air outside tasted different, not just because it was fresh. It carried something else now, like chemicals on fire, like old wires smouldering in the walls of a house you forgot to unplug. It was quiet, but not peaceful. I kept expecting to hear a bird or the whoosh of passing cars on the main road, but all I heard was the wind brushing leaves and the occasional dull echo of something slamming shut in the distance. Even the air felt like it had gone stale. I took the narrow maintenance trail that curved behind the hospital and came out near the woods that bordered South Jefferson Road. There was a utility right-of-way there, some old power lines above, and a gravel service road that maintenance staff used to check the poles. I remembered one of the orderlies talking about cutting through that way for a smoke break. Now it was my lifeline. I followed it, moving slow and low, scanning every break in the trees for motion. I still had the shard of metal plate tucked in my sleeve. It was slick with rust and dull along the edge, but if I aimed right, I figured it might do enough damage to buy me time. I also had the ring of keys. I kept them wrapped in my jacket sleeve to stop the jingling. That sound, even tiny, could draw something, and I knew enough now to assume that what was out here didn't need much to start hunting. About an hour into my walk, I reached a chain-link fence half collapsed near a substation. The whole structure was humming faintly on backup power, one side scorched black like something had blown out recently. A white van was parked half in a ditch next to it, Morris County Water Authority stenciled on the side. Its front windshield was cracked, the passenger door half open. I stopped 20 yards out and watched it for a long time. No motion, no sound. Eventually, I crept closer. The inside smelled like rotting fast food, and something else, rancid, like wet towels left in the heat. The driver was slumped sideways, his seatbelt still fastened. His head had been opened, no blood left, just the dried outline of where it had gone. Flies had nested in the floor mats. I pulled open the back of the van and found a first aid kit, a flashlight that barely worked, and a crowbar under the maintenance rack. I kept the crowbar. It felt solid, balanced, better than my improvised shard. There were no maps in the vehicle, but there was a clipboard with a route log. Last entry, Tuesday, 9:13 a.m., Greystone Water Tower inspection. No year written, just a date. I took it anyway. Not for the destination, but because whoever had written it had done so like it was still a normal week. That meant the collapse hadn't been gradual. It had come fast. Too fast for even utility crews to pull out of the field. I took the crowbar and climbed back out onto the gravel. The route curved southeast toward the old Greystone Park Psychiatric Center ruins. That place had been shuttered for years, mostly demolished, but a new medical complex had gone up on part of the land. If the substation was out, maybe the emergency services hub was still functioning, or at least occupied. I walked. Every time I passed a road sign or broken mile marker, I felt like I was stepping out of some old version of myself. I wasn't just the guy who used to sit in a locked room talking to a reflection in the window. I was now something else. Not cured, not better, just awake. It took me about another hour to reach the tree line overlooking Route 10. I stayed hidden in the brush and looked out over the road. It was wrecked. Not like an accident, like a war zone. 5 or 6 vehicles lay crumpled in the westbound lane. 2 sedans, a minivan, and a box truck jackknifed sideways. The back of the truck had burst open. A stream of boxes lined the road behind it. I couldn't see what was in them, but it didn't matter. The important part was that the whole scene was silent. No emergency services, no flares, no movement. I waited, watched. That's when I saw the first one. It came from the trees near the eastern shoulder, walking slowly, awkwardly, almost like a drunk trying to remember how legs worked. It paused every few steps and tilted its head, like it was listening. Its skin looked peeled, like old wallpaper curling away from drywall. I stayed low and held my breath. 2 more followed. They didn't talk, didn't run, just wandered. But they stuck together, not quite in formation but close, like moths circling the same lamp. I backed into the brush and started to angle toward a drainage ditch that passed under the road. If I could get through without drawing attention, I could bypass the wreckage and keep moving east. The culvert was narrow. I had to crouch low to fit, the air thick with mildew and runoff. Graffiti lined the walls, old names, curse words, hearts carved into mossy concrete. The other end opened into a brushy embankment behind an auto repair shop. I climbed out slowly, checked my surroundings, and darted for cover behind a dumpster. Still, no movement. I entered the building through a shattered garage door. The inside was ransacked, broken tools everywhere. A few lockers had been pried open. I found a dented toolbox and pulled out a roll of tape, a utility knife with one remaining blade, and a grimy rag I used to wipe down my arms. Behind the counter was a half-eaten sandwich and a cup of coffee long gone cold. Someone had left in a hurry. In the waiting room, I found a cracked radio, old model, battery-powered. I turned the dial slowly, static buzzing in and out. Then, faintly, I caught something. A voice, half a sentence. Quarantine collapsed. No safe zones remain. If you're hearing this, then static again. I turned the dial back and forth but couldn't lock it in. I held the radio to my ear and waited. A few more garbled phrases came through. CDC field offices compromised. Safe travel not advised. Use extreme caution with exposed individuals. That was the moment I realized there wasn't a rescue coming. No convoys, no FEMA shelters being set up in stadiums. Whatever had started inside hospitals like St. Joseph's had already breached containment. It was everywhere. I took the radio and packed it in the plastic bag I'd found behind the counter, slipped it into my coat. I wasn't sure what direction to head in anymore, but the voice on the radio had mentioned the CDC. There was a regional office in Newark, not a full facility, but they used it for training and outbreak preparedness. If there was any coordination still happening, it would be there. Newark was over 20 miles away. I didn't have a vehicle. I didn't have food. I didn't even have a real map. But I knew how to avoid being seen. Years of slipping out of group therapy, of navigating the hallways between orderlies, of watching patterns and slipping between blind spots. I could do this out here too. I found a bicycle behind the shop. Rusted, bent at the handlebars, but the tires held air. I broke off a piece of broom handle and jammed it in as a makeshift grip, taped over the cracked seat, and used a scrap of wire to hold the chain in place. I rode through back lots and parking alleys, weaving between service lanes and old office parks. Every so often, I'd hear movement, shuffling feet, a moan, or the sudden slam of metal. I never stopped to check. Once, I saw a survivor. He was standing on the roof of a gas station, waving down at the highway. His mouth moved, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. As I passed, I saw the outline of something crawling up the back of the awning. I looked away before I saw how it ended. I didn't sleep that night. I made it to a strip mall on the edge of Livingston, holed up in the back of a mattress store. Used a display sheet to cover myself. There was no electricity, but the windows had blackout panels. I sat against a wall and counted my supplies. I had half of a protein bar, a crowbar with chipped paint and a sticky grip, a battery-powered radio that picked up nothing but fragments, and a flashlight that was already dimming. My legs ached from pedaling the bent bike for hours, and my shoulders throbbed from carrying everything in a makeshift trash bag sling. But I wasn't injured, not bitten, not infected, just tired. I couldn't afford to fall asleep though, not yet. Around 3 in the morning I heard something. It started as a dull thud, then a series of scraping sounds against the aluminum door at the back of the store. I didn't move, just pulled the display sheet tighter and held my breath. It continued for nearly 20 minutes. Sometimes it paused, then returned, like whoever or whatever was outside had forgotten what it was doing and then remembered. I knew better than to make a sound. Eventually it stopped. No footsteps retreating, just silence. At dawn, I risked a glance through a crack in the store's side door. The parking lot was still. A few cars sat abandoned, doors ajar, glass shattered on the pavement. Far off, beyond the gas station across the road, I could see smoke. Not just a single column, but several, like chimneys of a dead factory pumping black into the sky. The city wasn't recovering, it was burning. I left the store an hour later and kept moving east, sticking to the smaller residential roads where houses backed up against parks or wooded trails. I passed driveways filled with cars that would never move again. In one neighborhood, a sprinkler system had activated automatically, watering a brown lawn while a body lay face down on the sidewalk nearby. No one had bothered to turn anything off. Maybe no one was left to do it. On Eisenhower Parkway, I found a delivery truck halfway up a curb, engine cold. The back was open. Inside were boxes of boxed juice, crackers, canned food. No one in the cab, no sign of struggle. I loaded what I could into a canvas tote I found in a school parking lot nearby and kept going. It was the first proper meal I'd had since the outbreak. I didn't savor it, just chewed, fast and quiet, and moved on. By midday, I reached the outskirts of West Orange, cutting behind Turtleback Zoo to avoid the major roads. The zoo was abandoned, gates open, cages, some of them too. I didn't go near it. Something about the silence there felt wrong, like the animals knew long before we did what was coming and had made their decision. I found shelter that night inside a shuttered medical office. The entrance had been broken open, but the interior was undisturbed. I locked myself in an exam room, propped a chair under the doorknob, and used a blood pressure cuff to secure the handle. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I took a few adhesive bandages for my blisters and scavenged a small bottle of ibuprofen from a cabinet. The next morning, I climbed the stairs to the roof. From there, I could see toward Newark. What I saw froze me. Columns of smoke, a faint orange haze. Helicopters, 2 of them, moving slowly along the skyline, not military, civilian, probably news or chartered evac. One of them hovered too long near a rooftop and then suddenly spiraled, clipped a building, and vanished behind a plume of dust. I never saw it rise again. I stayed up there for a while, mapping out streets in my mind. If I cut across South Orange, kept below Interstate 280, I could reach Newark in under a day on foot, assuming no interruptions. I didn't believe in assumptions anymore. I made my move after sundown, heading into Maplewood and using old walking trails along the railway corridor. The town was eerie, storefronts smashed, mannequins in boutique windows stripped or broken. Most homes looked untouched, no broken doors, no fires, just quiet, like everyone had simply walked out and never came back. That's when I ran into my first real obstacle, a barricade across Springfield Avenue built from dumpsters, fencing, and burned-out vehicles. A handwritten sign hung crooked from the top. No entry. Sick inside. Keep out. I crept around the edge using an alley and saw what was left of whoever built it. 7 bodies, some half covered with blankets, one tied to a pole by the arms. They hadn't been dead long. No decay, just stillness. Their faces didn't show fear, more like exhaustion. Like giving up was just easier. I didn't touch anything. Past the barricade, I followed the edge of Vailsburg Park, keeping the trees between me and the skyline. As I entered Newark proper, the air changed again, acrid, denser. You could smell the burning rubber, the chemical runoff. The closer I got to the industrial districts, the more ash I saw on the ground. Everything looked grey, even the sky. It wasn't long before I realized Newark hadn't just fallen, it had been wiped out. Storefronts gutted, windows blackened from fire. A whole stretch of Market Street collapsed under what looked like a gas main explosion. Whatever the CDC or National Guard had tried to set up here, it didn't hold. It didn't even get started. I moved building to building, checking for anything, maps, radios, markings on walls. In one lobby, someone had scrawled, "The river's worse," in spray paint. I didn't understand it then, not fully, but the warning settled in the pit of my stomach like a stone. When I finally reached the CDC field office, a low brick building near Raymond Boulevard, the front was sealed with police tape and folding barricades. Signs read, "Authorized entry only, level 4 biohazard." I ignored them. At that point, the rules didn't matter. No one was left to enforce them. Inside, I found only silence. The reception desk had a bullet hole in the glass. Blood stained the wall behind it. The security monitors were still running on backup power, looping through static-filled camera feeds. Most showed empty corridors. One showed movement, something crawling past a glass door, fast and low. I didn't wait to find out what. In the back, I found a communications room, equipment smashed, a single hardline phone still blinking. I picked it up. No dial tone, just faint static. I held it to my ear for a while anyway, half expecting anyone to speak. Then I heard a whisper, not speech, not language, just breath. Like someone breathing from a long distance away. I hung up. I found a map pinned to the wall, a logistics chart showing alternate emergency shelters. Most were crossed out in red. One circle remained, Fort Monmouth, down the coast. It was nearly 40 miles away. I folded the map, grabbed a broken radio headset, and stuffed them both into my coat. As I stepped out into the late afternoon sun, I looked down the street and saw them, 3 of the infected, moving slowly across the road, dragging chains behind them. Their eyes were clouded, their hands twitching. One stopped and lifted its head, sniffing the air. I moved fast, ducking into the alley behind an old theater, didn't look back. That night, I slept in an elevator shaft, wedged between the wall and the emergency ladder. I wedged the crowbar through the upper rails so nothing could pull the door open. The city groaned around me. Sirens wailed on auto loop. Fires popped in distant corners. At some point during the night, I heard the building shift. It was a low, deep sound, concrete creaking under stress, metal contracting in the cold. It made me freeze, more than the infected ever had. A structure like that, already burned and half abandoned, could fall in on itself without warning. I waited until dawn lit the upper windows before I slipped out. The stairwells were still intact. I moved slow, stepping carefully over shards of broken glass and bits of insulation hanging like vines. The The streets were clearer at sunrise. Whatever the infected did at night, they didn't seem to do it in daylight. I used that to my advantage and headed south toward Elizabeth, sticking close to the New Jersey Turnpike, though I never walked directly on it. I stayed beneath the overpasses and followed service roads when I could. Along the way, I passed a train yard, rows of stalled freight cars, their sides tagged with graffiti, some so recent the paint still glistened. I considered trying to get inside one, maybe find something useful, but then I saw a dark smear along the edge of one door and what looked like handprints streaked across the gravel beside it. No way to know if it had been infected or desperate survivors. Either way, I didn't want to know. I scavenged from gas stations, what was left of them. The registers had been emptied, fridges looted, but sometimes there were odd things people didn't think to grab. In one, I found a sealed bottle of water under a floor display. In another, a flashlight with almost new batteries behind the counter. In the third, a body, propped against the cooler with a makeshift tourniquet on one leg and a folding knife clutched in one hand. I didn't look long. Whatever happened, it was over. By noon, the heat was coming down hard. Mid-June in New Jersey meant humidity you could feel in your teeth. The air was thick, the sky pale blue with a yellow haze near the horizon. I tied a strip of fabric around my head to keep the sweat out of my eyes and kept moving. Near Carteret, I found a police SUV flipped over and burned out. There was a shotgun still locked in the rack, but the mount was scorched and twisted. I pried it loose with the crowbar and took what I could. 3 shells in the door compartment. It wasn't much, but it was something. Crossing the Raritan River was the first real obstacle. The Vicory Bridge was too exposed, cars jammed at both ends, smoke still drifting from the median. I didn't trust it. Instead, I cut down towards Sayreville, where an old maintenance bridge for utilities spanned the water. It was narrow and rusted, with patches of metal grating barely holding. Halfway across, I heard the first groan behind me. I didn't look, didn't stop. I moved fast but quiet, hugging the railing. My wrapped feet barely made a sound. When I reached the other side, I dropped down into the tree line and didn't stop until I'd put a mile between me and the river. Whatever was following me didn't keep pace. The world changed as I neared the coast. Less vertical, more open. The horizon was flat, and the trees gave way to brush and old neighborhoods that hadn't seen maintenance in weeks. Lawns overgrown, windows shattered, mail piled up like snowdrifts. I saw a group of infected standing in a cul-de-sac near a burned-out SUV, just standing. No movement, no noise, just waiting. That was the worst part, the waiting, like they were listening for something only they could hear. I bypassed them through backyards, leaping a fence into a dried-up drainage canal. My legs buckled on landing, and for a second, I thought I'd torn something. But it passed, just fatigue. I took a moment under the overhang of a broken swing set and pulled out the radio. For a long time, it was just static, then a flicker, a voice, garbled but real. Monmouth, Eastern Perimeter, fall back, repeat. I adjusted the dial, but the signal was weak. Still, it was enough. Fort Monmouth was still active, somehow. I cut east across Tinton Falls, avoiding main roads and keeping behind shopping centers and office parks. Most had been looted already. In one, I found a backpack, child-sized but usable. It had a notebook inside with crayon drawings of stick figures and what looked like helicopters. I kept it, not for use, just to remember. The closer I got to Eatontown, the more signs of conflict I saw. Burned-out barricades, shell casings in the street, a crumpled sign that read, "Evac here," with a red X slashed across it. The world had tried to organize once, then it fell apart. At the final approach, I saw the fences. Fort Monmouth's eastern entrance was lined with shipping containers stacked 3 high, creating a wall. Watchtowers made of scaffolding rose at intervals. The flag above the main gate was hanging limp, sun-bleached, one corner torn, and it was quiet. Too quiet. I approached from the tree line, circling wide to the north. I saw no patrols, no guards, no movement, but the gate was open, not broken, just open, like someone had left in a hurry and never came back. I crept in, crowbar in hand, listening. The inside was a ghost town, barracks empty, vehicles abandoned mid-unload. One had a gurney still strapped to its rear bed with restraints torn loose, blood on the tires, not fresh. I entered the main command building. The interior was stripped, radios smashed, papers burned in piles, but on one desk was a printed evacuation notice dated June 4th. The last line read, "If unable to reach Camp Vicory, destroy comms and initiate silent fallback. No further civilian intake authorized." I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. They were gone. The last hope I'd been chasing for days, through ash and blood and silence, it had already collapsed. Camp Vicory was farther south, somewhere in Ocean County. I didn't know exactly where, no map, no route, just another ghost. I took the water from the mess hall, filled 2 bottles and stuffed them in my pack, found a tarp and wrapped it around my shoulders. Night was coming. The sky was bruising over and the winds had started to shift. As I left the base, I stopped near the main gate. There was a message spray-painted in black across the wall. They listen, they learn. I didn't understand it. Not then. I do now. That night, I set camp in the shell of an old administration building. No roof, just walls. I built a small fire from chair legs and file folders, using an old fuse to spark it. As the flames crackled, I pulled out the notebook from the kid's backpack, flipped through it slowly, then I wrote something on the last page. My name is Eli Tanner. I was a patient in Isolation Ward 14C. If you find this, I made it as far as Fort Monmouth. I'm still alive, still thinking, still human. I left the notebook there, weighed under a stone, and I kept walking. No destination, no rescue, just 1 foot in front of the other, because the world wasn't coming back, but I wasn't done yet. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.